Hi, my name is Gloria Glidden, Head of the Banking Supervision Division of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority, SEMA. Today, I will present a summary of the results of the Money Services Business Sector Risk Assessment, or MSB SRA for short, conducted by SEMA in 2019. The MSB SRA includes an assessment of the risks of money laundering and terrorist financing in the money services business sector under the supervision of the authority. Firstly, I will provide a background and overview of the MSB sector, followed by an overview of the combined sectoral risk assessment. Next, I will explain the risk assessment methodology used. I will then provide a summary of the MSB SRA, followed by a summary of the inherent risks. I will end the presentation by sharing the key takeaways for licensees. In 2019, SEMA conducted a combined sector risk assessment of the risks of money laundering and terrorist financing in the various financial sectors under the supervision of the authority. In addition to the information provided in the combined sector risk assessment, the purpose of this presentation is to identify and assess in more detail the money laundering terrorist financing risks faced by the MSB sector in the Cayman Islands, to evaluate risks from a sectoral perspective only, not intended to cover risks that may be specific to the circumstances of individual money service businesses, to assist licensees in their efforts to augment their business-wide risk assessment and their development and application of a risk-based approach to compliance with the anti-money laundering regulations, and thus towards combating money laundering and terrorist financing. All MSBs in the Cayman Islands are licensed and regulated by SEMA in accordance with the Money Services Law. The Money Services Law defines a money service business as the business of providing in or from within the islands any of the following services: money transmission, check cashing, currency exchange, the issuance, sale, or redemption of money orders or traveler's checks, and such other services as the Governor and Cabinet may specify by notice in the Gazette, or B, the business of operating as an agent or franchise holder of a business mentioned in A. As of September 2019, the Cayman Islands had a total of 5 licensed MSBs, of which only 3 were active in the provision of money service business. The MSBs cater primarily to the resident domestic market. Risk assessments were conducted of the sectors listed as follows: banks, Category A and Category B, money service businesses, trust and corporate service providers, insurance, mutual fund administrators, securities licensees, and securities and investment business law registered persons, that is, previously defined excluded persons under the securities and investment business law. A summary of the sectoral risk ratings was published on SEMA's website in the Combined Sectoral Risk Assessment on the 13th of March 2020, and the link has been provided in the presentation for reference. The MSB Sector Risk Assessment examines the inherent money laundering terrorist financing risks to which the Cayman Islands MSB sector is exposed. Inherent risk is the risk that a particular product, service, customer delivery channel, or activity poses, regardless of the entity that offers it and not considering any risk mitigating controls that may be in place. This approach allows for the creation of peer groups and for the benchmarking of expected controls. The actual controls will vary from MSB to MSB and are expected to be commensurate with the inherent risk that each MSB is exposed to. Risk factors in the following categories have been considered for the purposes of this money laundering terrorist financing risk assessment: nature, size, and complexity of the sector, transactions, products and services, delivery channels, and types of customers. Geographical risk factors are considered in the context of each of these categories, as geography is an overarching dimension of all risk categories. All those risk factors combined provides the overall inherent risk. This slide provides a summary of the MSB sector risk assessment. Based on the inherent risk factors that we have discussed and those that are listed here on the slide, each subsector of the MSB sector has been given one of the four risk ratings: low, medium high, high, as well as an overall consolidated inherent risk rating for each subsector assessed. For nature, scale, diversity, and complexity of the sector, and types of customers, the overall risk score was assessed as medium-high. For delivery channels, agent risk, the overall risk score was assessed as medium-low. For transactions, products, and services, the overall risk score was assessed as high, for an overall inherent risk score for the MSB sector of medium-high. The key considerations for the overall medium-high risk score for the MSB sector are as follows. The Cayman Islands MSB sector is relatively small compared to other financial services industry sectors. The sector is composed of very few players that offer products and services that are not considered complex, although cash intensive. Transactions are undertaken face-to-face, although agents are utilized to a lesser extent. Very few customers are PEPs, and remittances to high-risk countries are not significant. In fact, remittances are predominantly consistent with the countries of origin of the expatriate residents. For the inherent risk factor for nature, scale, diversity, and complexity, the risk score was assessed as medium-high. The key inherent risk score considerations include MSBs utilize a number of agents, generally involves one-off transactions. Regular repeat customers are also common. And the MSB sector is by far smaller than the banking sector as far as the volume of transactions, complexity of operations, global interconnectedness, and the number of licensed operators are concerned. The small number of MSBs operating in the Cayman Islands with a narrow array of products and services, coupled with a simple business model, reduce vulnerabilities in the MSB sector. For the inherent risk factor of transactions, products, and services, the risk score was assessed as high. Key inherent risk score considerations include the Cayman Islands MSBs transacts with residents from a number of countries in the world who live and work in the jurisdiction. This leaves the MSB sector at risk to be misused for money laundering and terrorist financing. The fact that the largest volume of funds come from or are sent to Jamaica, Philippines, Honduras, and the United States, countries which are well represented in the expatriate community, does not necessarily imply that there is no risk in these transactions. However, the Cayman Islands places reliance on the fact that these countries were positively assessed by the FATF, with the only concern being the Philippines, which appears on the top 20 Global Terrorism Index. The positive correlation between the geographic distribution of the customers' nationalities and the remittances by country decrease this vulnerability from money laundering and terrorist financing to an extent, as the foreign residents of the Cayman Islands generally maintain close family ties with their countries of origin. The overall risk rating for transactions, products, and services has been determined as high due to the cash-intensive nature of the products. For the inherent risk factor of delivery channels, agent risk, the risk score was assessed as medium-low. Key inherent risk score considerations include onboarding was not reported by the sector. The use of agents is very minimal considering the number of customers reportedly being served by the 3 active MSBs. Furthermore, there is no use of group entities in the delivery of services due to the nature of the MSB sector, whereby customers are normally face-to-face. The subsidiaries, affiliates, and/or branches are mostly located in low-risk countries. As such, the risk for delivery channels has been rated as medium-low. For the inherent risk factor for types of customers, the risk score has been assessed as medium-high. Although for the MSB sector, customers are natural and local persons with limited exposure to high-risk customers such as foreign PEPs, there are customers with high geographic risk exposure, and 9% of transactions are with high-risk countries. This slide provides the key takeaways for licensees. Entities should consider the MSB sector risk assessment in conducting their institutional, money laundering, terrorist financing risk assessments, including customer risk assessments, and in taking measures to applying a risk-based approach, including risk identification and assessment, designing your AML CFT program. Inherent risk categories should be considered in your risk-based approach, and inherent risk scores drive risk management and mitigation. There are 4 key elements of a risk-based approach. I will briefly discuss each of these elements. First, identification and assessment. Second, management and mitigation. Third, ongoing monitoring. And fourth, documentation. The first element relates to identification of AML, CFT, PF risks based on the 4 principal factors. That is, customers, product services, delivery channels, and geography. These have been referred to extensively throughout this presentation. The second element of the risk-based approach is management and mitigation. This requires MSBs to identify and apply measures to mitigate the risks identified in the first step. Some of management and mitigation measures include targeted training, appropriate CDD procedures, and review of business relationships with customers. The third element of a risk-based approach is ongoing monitoring, which requires MSBs to implement policies, procedures, and IT systems to monitor changes in money laundering, terrorist financing, and proliferation financing risks. This is to ensure the risk-based approach remains relevant. The last element of the risk-based approach pertains to the documentation of the risk-based approach, including documentation on the first 3 elements of the risk-based approach. And it includes risk assessment, strategies, policies, and procedures. I have included this slide with additional reading with references and resources that you may find very useful. Most of these are published on CIMA's website. Thank you, and I trust you have found this presentation useful. If you have any questions on this session, please contact the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority by sending an email to contactamlcft@cima.ky.